The night they decided to bury Freya alive, they did it with champagne flutes and polite applause. The grand ballroom of the Hanwoo Palace Hotel glittered like a crown jewel under Seoul's winter sky. 500 guests in black tie. Crystal chandeliers. A string quartet playing something soft enough to make cruelty sound elegant. And at the center of it all, Freya. Standing exactly where they had placed her. Like a vase they had already decided to shatter. She had worn white on purpose. Not for innocence. Not for purity. She wore white because she had made herself a promise: if this was the last time she ever walked into a room as his wife, she would walk out as herself. Her back was straight. Her sleek dark waves brushed her shoulders like a calm she did not fully feel yet. And her hands, she kept her hands perfectly still at her sides, because if she let them tremble, even once, they would win. Tae-won's voice came through the microphone like something rehearsed. I regret to inform our family and friends that Freya and I will be parting ways. A pause. Deliberately theatrical. She was unable to give this family what it needed. The whispers erupted like a tide she had known was coming but still felt the weight of, cold and suffocating all the same. She heard the words before anyone even said them out loud. She had been hearing them for 3 years. Barren. Broken. A woman with a hollow future. Laughter trickled from somewhere near the back. Someone's mother covered her mouth, not in horror, but to hide her smile. His aunt, the one who had once referred to Freya as an experiment in diversity, lifted her champagne glass almost imperceptibly, as if to toast. And Freya stood there and took it. Because that was what they expected. That was the role she was supposed to perform, the disgraced outsider who accepted her exile gracefully, who bowed her head and disappeared into the night, grateful not to cause more trouble. She took one breath. Then another. She would not bow. Then, the lights flickered. Every head in the room turned. The grand front doors, 10 feet tall, gold-handled, the kind that existed to make people feel small, swung open without anyone touching them. And the music stopped. Not because the quartet chose to stop. They stopped because every single person in the room felt, simultaneously, the particular electricity that precedes something dangerous. The string players lowered their bows instinctively, the way small animals go still before a storm. 6 men in black entered first. Not walking, positioned. Shoulders squared, hands clasped behind their backs, scanning the room with eyes that catalogued threats the way other people catalogued weather. They split, 3 to the left, 3 to the right, and created a corridor of human authority through the crowd without a single word spoken. And then he walked in. Lee-Jun. Even those who did not know his name understood, in the primal language beneath all social conditioning, that they were no longer the most powerful people in the room. He was tall in the way that had nothing to do with height. His black tuxedo was immaculate, perfectly tailored to a body that held itself like a controlled weapon. A single white pocket square at his chest, a deliberate detail, Freya would later come to understand, though she did not understand it yet. His dark hair swept back with total precision. His face, sharp, unreadable, composed. And his eyes. His eyes moved through the crowd like they were furniture. Until they found her. And stopped. The entire room felt that stop. Tae-won's rehearsed smile began to falter at the corners. Lee-Jun walked forward. The crowd parted for him the way water parts for something with sufficient force behind it, not dramatically, not fearfully, but inevitably. He moved without hurry, without hesitation, directly toward Freya. Not toward the hosts. Not toward the distinguished elders near the podium or the foreign ambassadors by the bar who were quietly reaching for their phones. Toward her. He stopped in front of her. Close enough that she could see the exact quality of his stillness, the kind that only belongs to men who have stood in rooms far more dangerous than this one and never flinched. He extended his hand. Freya looked at it for exactly 1 second. Then she looked up at his face, searching, the way she always searched, for the deception beneath the gesture. For the angle. For the cost. She found nothing but certainty. And in a room full of people who had just watched her be discarded like something broken. Freya took his hand. The crowd did not speak. Did not move. 500 people in black tie stood in collective, breathless confusion as the most feared man in South Korea held the hand of the woman they had just publicly dismissed as worthless. And Lee-Jun spoke 4 words into the silence, quiet enough that only she, and the recording that would later end her ex-husband's career, could fully hear. You were never theirs. Outside, a motorcade of black vehicles idled at the curb. Patient. Unhurried. Waiting for their boss. And his life partner. This is where Freya's real story begins. Not in the ballroom where they tried to erase her, but in the moment she chose to let someone who understood real power show her that she had always carried her own. What happened next would shake Seoul's elite to its very foundation. Secrets buried inside medical files. A betrayal hidden within Lee-Jun's own inner circle. And a woman who walked into that ballroom believing she was broken, walking out as the most dangerous person in any room she entered. Subscribe to see how this unfolds, and comment where you're watching from. I will love to say hello to you, just to know how far our story is going. Blackheart. Here's what I built into the structure for you, following your competitor's blueprint but making it entirely your own. The hook opens mid-humiliation. We drop the reader straight into the ballroom wound so they feel Freya's pain before they even know her name. Freya's white dress becomes her silent act of defiance before Lee-Jun ever arrives, so she already has agency. The intro mirrors the competitor's contrast technique, civilized cruelty versus criminal honor, but your version lands harder because Freya actively chooses to take Lee-Jun's hand rather than being rescued passively. The forward line, "You were never theirs," is your story's thesis delivered like a bullet. The CTA is woven in as a natural cliffhanger, not an afterthought. Readers are already emotionally invested, so the subscribe ask feels like an invitation rather than an interruption. The night they decided to bury Freya alive, they did it with champagne flutes and polite applause. The grand ballroom of the Hanwoo Palace Hotel glittered like a crown jewel under Seoul's winter sky. 500 guests in black tie. Crystal chandeliers. A string quartet playing something soft enough to make cruelty sound elegant. And at the center of it all, Freya. Standing exactly where they had placed her. Like a vase they had already decided to shatter. She had worn white on purpose. Not for innocence. Not for purity. She wore white because she had made herself a promise: if this was the last time she walked into a room as his wife, she would walk out as herself. Her back was straight. Her sleek dark waves brushed her shoulders like a calm she did not fully feel yet. And her hands, she kept her hands perfectly still at her sides, because if she let them tremble, even once, they would win. Tae-won's voice came through the microphone like something rehearsed. I regret to inform our family and friends that Freya and I will be parting ways. She was unable to give this family what it needed. The whispers came like a tide, cold, suffocating, inevitable. 3 years. 3 years of doctors' waiting rooms and her mother-in-law's pointed silences, and the way Tae-won's family had always looked at her like a guest who had overstayed her welcome in a house she had helped build. 3 years of being told, in 100 different polished ways, that her body was the problem. That she was the problem. Barren. Broken. A woman with a hollow future. Laughter trickled from somewhere near the back. His aunt, the one who had once referred to Freya's presence in the family as an interesting social experiment, lifted her champagne glass almost imperceptibly. A private toast. Freya saw it. She was meant to see it. She took one breath. Then another. She would not bow. But she did not know yet that the night was not done with her. She did not know that something was already moving through the city, cutting through traffic, parting the dark like a blade, something that had been watching from a distance long enough to have already made up its mind. Then the lights flickered. Every head turned. The grand front doors, 10 feet tall, gold-handled, the kind designed to make people feel small, opened without anyone touching them. And the music stopped. Not by choice. The string players simply lowered their bows the way animals go still before a storm, responding to something their bodies registered before their minds could name it. 6 men in black entered first. Not walking. Positioned. Shoulders squared, eyes cutting across the room with the calm efficiency of people who assessed danger for a living. They split, 3 left, 3 right, and created a corridor of absolute authority through the crowd without a single spoken word. And then he walked in. Lee-Jun. The name passed through the room in a whisper so reverent it was almost afraid of itself. Even those who did not know his name felt, in the primal register beneath all social conditioning, that they were no longer the most powerful people in the room. His tuxedo was black. Impeccable. A single white pocket square at his chest, the only light on him, deliberate as a signature. His face was sharp and composed, and his eyes moved through the crowd like they were furniture. Until they found her. And stopped. Tae-won's rehearsed smile cracked at the edges. Lee-Jun walked forward. The crowd parted for him the way water parts for something with sufficient force, not dramatically, not fearfully, but inevitably. He crossed the full length of that ballroom without once looking away from Freya. He stopped in front of her. Close enough that she could see the precise quality of his stillness, the kind that only belongs to men who have stood in genuinely dangerous rooms and never once flinched. He extended his hand. Freya stared at it for exactly 1 second. Then she looked up at his face, searching for the lie beneath the gesture, for the angle, for the cost. She found nothing but certainty. And in a room full of people who had just watched her be discarded. Freya took his hand. 500 people in black tie stood in collective, breathless confusion as the most feared man in South Korea held the hand of the woman they had just publicly dismissed. Lee-Jun leaned in and spoke 4 words into the silence, quiet as a verdict. You were never theirs. Outside, the motorcade idled. Patient. Unhurried. Waiting. The car smelled like leather and something expensive she couldn't name. Freya sat in the back seat of the lead vehicle, the city sliding past the tinted windows like a film she wasn't sure she was still part of. Lee-Jun sat beside her. He had not explained himself. He did not appear to be the kind of man who did. Where are you taking me? She asked. Somewhere you will be safe, he said. For tonight, that is enough. She wanted to argue. She had spent 3 years in a house where she was not safe and had learned to argue for every inch of her own dignity. But something in his voice, not softness, not warmth, something more structural than either, made her hold the argument back. She looked at him instead, measuring. You know who I am, she said. It was not a question. I have known about you for some time, he said. I know what they did to you. I know what they took. She turned back to the window. Seoul moved past in streaks of light. What they took. She turned the phrase over in her mind and felt something dangerous stir beneath the numbness she had been living inside, something that felt uncomfortably like hope, which was the one thing she had been most careful to stop carrying. The compound was a different world. Not large in the ostentatious way of Tae-won's family estates, those sprawling performances of wealth designed to intimidate guests into gratitude. Lee-Jun's home was vast in the way of things built for purpose rather than theater. Stone walls. Security that moved like water, present everywhere, invisible until needed. And inside, men and women who straightened when Lee-Jun entered not from fear, but from the kind of respect that is only ever earned. They looked at Freya with curiosity. With caution. Not with contempt. She noticed that immediately. After 3 years of rooms where contempt was the baseline, the absence of it felt strange enough to be disorienting. A woman named Minji, compact, precise, with the eyes of someone who had seen considerably more than she would ever discuss, showed Freya to her rooms. They were elegant and spare. There were fresh flowers on the table that someone had placed there before she arrived, which meant this had been planned, which meant she had not been a spontaneous rescue but a deliberate choice. That thought sat with her through the night. By morning, she had decided that if she was going to be in this world, whatever this world was, she was going to understand it. You think weakness is what happened to you tonight, Lee-Jun said. They were in the East Room, which functioned, she had come to understand, as something between a war room and a study. Maps. Screens. Folders she was not yet permitted to open. He was standing at the window with his coffee, watching the gardens below with the same focused attention he seemed to apply to everything. I think weakness is what they wanted me to believe, she said carefully. He turned and looked at her with something that might have been approval on a face less controlled. Better, he said. But not yet right. In this world, what looks like weakness from the outside is often the most dangerous position of all. You were standing in the center of that room, surrounded, with nothing visible to protect you. He paused. And yet, not one person there touched you. She thought about that. Because they didn't need to. They had already won. They believed they had already won, he said. There is a significant difference. That was the first lesson. It was the beginning of many. Over the weeks that followed, Lee-Jun's world opened to her in careful increments. Self-defense, not the performative kind taught in studios, but the efficient, unglamorous kind that Min-ji oversaw with the quiet intensity of someone who had once needed it in real circumstances. Intelligence gathering, how to read a room, how to identify the person in any group who was most afraid, how to track information across a paper trail the way you track water back to its source. And strategy, the particular kind that required sitting with discomfort long enough to understand it rather than simply reacting to it. She was not a natural fighter. But she was, it turned out, a natural reader of people, a skill she had been developing for years in a marriage where her survival had quietly depended on it. Lee-Jun noticed that. He adjusted her training accordingly. His men noticed it too. Slowly, with the particular reserve of people who do not grant trust quickly because they have learned the cost of granting it too fast, they began to include her. To brief her. To look at her in the meetings she was invited to sit in not as a guest, but as someone whose presence had been factored into the calculation. She had lived inside Tae-won's world for 3 years and his closest lieutenants had never once learned her last name. These people learned her patterns within a week. The charity gala at the Latte Hotel was the kind of event Seoul's elite used to remind each other of the social order. Freya knew it because she had attended 6 of them as Tae-won's wife, always 3 steps behind, always performing the precise calibration of warmth and deference that had been silently required of her. She arrived on Lee-Jun's arm. The room went quiet in that specific way that means everyone is looking while pretending not to. She had worn midnight blue, Lee-Jun's suggestion, which she had almost refused on principle before she understood that he was not telling her what to wear but offering her a color that would read on every camera in the room as exactly what she was, a woman who had not come to apologize. Tae-won was near the bar. She spotted him before he spotted her, which was already a different dynamic than every previous version of this scene. He was with his lawyer and 2 men from his father's company, and when he finally turned and saw her, standing still, not moving toward him, not moving away, just present in the room as if she had always owned it, the color shifted in his face in a way that was deeply satisfying. Lee-Jun did not say anything. He did not need to. His hand rested at the small of her back, light as a question, and the simple fact of him standing beside her, of the 6 men positioned at subtle intervals around the room, of the way every significant person at that gala had already made their calculations about what it meant for her to be here with him, said everything that needed to be said. Tae-won crossed the room toward them. She had expected that. Predictable men always moved toward the thing they felt had escaped them. Freya, he said, with the particular tone that had once made her feel small, practiced, proprietary, faintly threatening. Tae-won, she said. Just his name. Level as a flat horizon. He looked at Lee-Jun. Then back at her. His jaw worked through several things he decided not to say. Then he walked away. She exhaled. Slowly. Once. That was worth 3 years of wait. It was Min-ji who brought her the files. 3 folders, flagged in red, placed on the table in the intelligence room without ceremony. He thought you should see these, Min-ji said, and left. Freya opened the first folder. It took her 40 minutes to understand what she was looking at. Medical records, her medical records, some of which she had never been shown, some of which she had been shown in edited form, none of which matched each other across the 3 different clinics Tae-won had directed her to visit over the course of their marriage. Her hands were not still now. They were moving, fast, precise, pulling pages, cross-referencing dates, following the inconsistencies like a trail of breadcrumbs dropped by someone who had never expected her to be the one to find them. The diagnosis had been fabricated. Not misdiagnosed. Not an honest error. Fabricated. The signatures did not match the licenses. One of the clinics listed as having treated her had been operating under a suspended registration at the time of her supposed consultation. And the letter, the official letter Tae-won had read aloud at a family dinner to justify beginning divorce proceedings, the one she had believed because she had held it in her own hands, had been produced by a clinic that had no record of her ever having been a patient. She sat with that knowledge for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and began building the documentation trail that would need to exist when the time came. She did not know the betrayal was already in motion. Seo-jin had been with Lee-Jun for 7 years. He was quiet, methodical, trusted, the kind of man who appeared in the background of every significant moment without ever becoming the focus of it. Freya had noticed him, of course, in the way she noticed everyone, but she had filed him under reliable because Lee-Jun seemed to trust him completely and Lee-Jun's judgment had not yet given her reason to question it. She was crossing the lower courtyard at 11 at night when she saw him on his phone by the east gate. She would not have thought anything of it. But she had been trained now, in the particular way of people who have learned that survival lives in small details, and she registered 3 things simultaneously. The gate was supposed to be locked at 10, Seo-jin was standing with his back to the main camera's angle, and the name he was speaking into the phone was hers. She did not run. She did not confront him. She went back inside, found Min-ji, and told her exactly what she had seen and heard. By the time Seo-jin came back through the east corridor 40 minutes later, there were 4 of Lee-Jun's most senior men waiting for him in a room he had not been invited to. And Freya was standing at Lee-Jun's side when he was brought in, not as a witness, but as the person who had caught him. Seo-jin looked at her with something that was almost respect, even then. "You were faster than I thought," he said. "Everyone is," she said. "Right up until they're not." The attack came on a Thursday. It was planned for quiet hours, the gap between the last security rotation and the first light of dawn, when even the most disciplined compound has its slowest moment. They came in through 2 points simultaneously, which meant resources and coordination, which meant Tae-won's family had spent significantly more to fund this than Freya had expected them to. She was awake. She was almost always awake at that hour now. Her body had recalibrated itself to the compound's rhythms, and her mind, sharper and more suspicious than it had ever been inside her marriage, woke her at the first distant sound that did not belong. She did not wait. She moved to the secure room, as planned. But she brought her laptop, and the files she had been building for 3 weeks, and the encrypted copies of everything she had found inside those 3 red folders. Lee-Jun was already operational. She could hear the compound responding around her, calm, fast, drilled, the way his people did everything, but she had a separate task now and she worked it with the same concentrated focus Lee-Jun had spent weeks helping her build. The secure broadcast uplink was already established. She had set it up 2 days earlier, quietly, after she had finished the documentation. She had simply not known exactly when she would need it. She knew now. Outside, the sounds escalated. Glass. Movement. Lee-Jun's voice, somewhere below, giving instructions in the flat-focused register she had come to understand meant he was in full command of a situation that was genuinely dangerous. She trusted that. She focused on her own work. She uploaded everything. The medical records. The fabricated diagnosis letter with its mismatched license signatures. The communication trail between Tae-won's family and the suspended clinic. The internal financial transfers that linked his father's holding company to the entire fabricated case against her. 7 journalists, 4 editors, 2 investigative units, and the National Medical Ethics Board, simultaneous delivery, time-stamped, with a cover document she had written herself in language so precise and unemotional that it read like the close of a court case. She hit send. 40 seconds later, her phone began to ring. She silenced it. She had other things to finish. By the time the police arrived at the compound, the fight was over. Tae-won's hired men were detained, calm and professional, by Lee-Jun's people. Tae-won himself, who had apparently believed that coordinating the attack from a hotel 12 kilometers away constituted safe distance, was met at his suite by officers who had received, in the preceding 17 minutes, enough documented evidence to make any alternative conversation unnecessary. His father's lawyer called 3 times before breakfast. No one answered. Freya stood at the window of the intelligence room as the first pale light broke over the city, watching the controlled activity below with the particular stillness of someone who has finished a very long piece of work and is only beginning to feel the weight of it lifting. Lee-Jun came in behind her. She heard him before she saw him, she had learned the specific cadence of him by now, the way his footfalls landed with that deliberate, unhurried authority. He stood beside her at the window. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "You sent it before the fighting was over," he said finally. "I didn't need the fighting to be over," she said. "I needed the uplink to be stable." A pause. Then, and she would remember this, later, as the first time she heard it, something that was unmistakably a quiet sound of approval from a man who produced them very rarely. "You were faster than I thought," he said. She looked at him sideways. "Everyone is," she said. "Right up until they're not." Seoul spread below them like a circuit board, a million lights, a million decisions, a million lives running their own hidden currents through the dark. The balcony of the compound's upper level caught the wind off the Han River, which smelled like winter and distance and something that might have been the beginning of spring. Freya stood at the railing. Lee-Jun stood beside her. Neither of them was performing anything, not dignity, not strength, not the careful curation of image they had both, in their very different histories, learned to maintain in front of the world. There was no one watching. There was no crowd to manage, no room to read, no angle to calculate. There was just the city. And 2 people who had both, separately, spent too long surrounded by people who confused proximity for loyalty, and had finally, in the most unlikely of circumstances, found something that felt like neither compromise nor performance. "What happens now?" Freya asked. Lee-Jun was quiet for a moment in the way that meant he was answering carefully rather than quickly. "Now," he said, "we rebuild. Not what existed before. Something better. Something that was always supposed to be yours." She thought about the woman who had stood in that ballroom 3 months ago, hands still, back straight, holding herself together with the fierce, quiet pride of someone who had decided that if they were going to watch her fall, they would at least fall standing. She thought about what that woman had believed about herself in that moment, that she was alone, that she was diminished, that the world she had worked so hard to belong to had rendered its verdict on her worth. She thought about how comprehensively wrong that world had been. "They called me broken," she said. "For 3 years. "I know," he said. "And the whole time, the only thing that was broken was the lie they built to hold me still." He turned and looked at her then, fully, directly, in the unhurried way that meant she had his complete attention, which she understood now was not a small thing. "Yes," he said simply. "That is exactly right." Below them, Seoul moved through its own complicated night, deals being made, secrets being kept, power shifting through invisible channels the way it always had and always would. But up here, above it all, something had been settled. Not loudly. Not with ceremony. Just 2 people standing on a balcony, finally free. And a woman who had walked into a ballroom as a vase someone intended to shatter, walking into everything that came next as the hand that held the hammer. Freya, who walked into that ballroom as someone they had already decided to discard. Who stood in the middle of 500 judgments and did not bow. Who entered a world she did not understand and mastered it anyway, not because someone saved her, but because she was never as broken as they needed her to believe. And Lee-Jun, the man who walked into a room full of the city's most powerful people and looked past every single one of them, to find her. This story is just getting started. If this episode moved you, if you felt something when Freya took his hand, when she hit send on that upload before the fighting was even over, when she stood on that balcony and finally exhaled, then you already know what to do. Hit that like button. Not just for the algorithm, but because a story about a woman reclaiming her truth deserves to be seen by as many people as possible. Every like puts this in front of someone who might need it today. Subscribe and turn on your notifications, because the next chapter is coming, and I promise you, you do not want to walk into it cold. Things are about to get deeper, sharper, and a whole lot more dangerous. And before you go, click on subscribe and drop a comment below. Tell me where in the world you're watching from. I genuinely want to say hello to every single one of you. I want to know how far this story has traveled. From wherever you are sitting right now, thank you for being here. This story belongs to all of us. See you in the next one.